Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. I got several posts from viewers on social media asking if I was okay today. And I want to thank everybody for their concerns, but I wasn't out on the streets of New York today. I was at home filming the video about Paula Patton's fried chicken. Now, I heard on the news about the tragic mass shooting that took place on a Manhattan-bound N train today, and I heard about the 10 people who were shot and 13 who were injured when a mass shooter went out here and set off a smoke bomb on that Manhattan-bound N train, put on a gas mask, and started shooting. Now, the police really don't know what to make of this incident, but when I take a critical examination of this incident, it's looking like it fits the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And it could be possible that this suspect could be one of those beta males who was simmering and boiling in anger and then got so frustrated that he wound up exploding in rage, where he participated in this extreme act of violence. And I have been telling people for years in these videos that we were going to see an increase in the frequency of this kind of violence. And what's really sad is nobody's really paying attention to the videos that I present talking about this man crisis. No, many in your politics and your business, many of these people are just refusing to acknowledge that the man crisis is the problem here as related to these acts of violence that are increasing in frequency and becoming more and more regular. Now, we are starting to see an increase in this frequency as related to these kinds of violence because as we've gone through this COVID lockdown, many of these beta males that have been across the country, they have had their fuses shortened, and as these men have been isolated for extended periods of time on internet echo chambers, what has happened is these men's fuses have been shortened to the point where they have become landmines. And as these landmines have been placed all across the country, we have 2 to 3 generations of these beta males who have had their fuses cut short, are simmering and boiling in anger as related to being stranded in echo chambers on the internet for an extended period of time. And these men are filled with rage, and many of these men now feel like they have nothing to lose. And this is one of the things that motivates them to participate in these extreme acts of violence like we saw today here on that subway train, where this individual who was sitting on this N train that was going to Manhattan put on a gas mask, dropped some smoke bombs out of a bag, and then started shooting up the train. Now, this whole incident practically caught most of New York's politicians off guard, and I believe it practically embarrassed them because almost 20 years after 9/11, where we had hijackers slam planes into the Twin Towers, and almost 30 years after a mass shooting where Colin Ferguson took a weapon onto a Long Island railroad, your New York politicians and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority were caught completely off guard by this mass shooter. Now, your MTA had spent billions of dollars on technology to put cameras inside of the 36th Street train station where this incident transpired, but none of those cameras were working inside of that station, and that's very embarrassing considering all of the technology the MTA has put into their subway stations over the course of 20 years that you didn't even have any cameras to record this individual as they were going on participating in this mass shooting or going out here presenting any sort of image of them as related to what was going on inside of the station. So that's one black eye on New York's Metropolitan Transit Authority. Another black eye was on your New York Mayor Eric Adams, who has shown that he has absolutely no control over New York City's crime, even though he ran on a political platform in 2021 saying that he could get New York City's crime completely under control. And over 100 days of him being in office, crime has gotten so out of control that it has spiked over 70%, and your New York City is looking worse than it did during the dark days of the 1980s and the early 90s when your Colin Ferguson went on an LIRR train and participated in a mass shooting. And this whole incident shows a complete failure of leadership of Eric Adams and his police department, because with this police department getting $10 billion and having over 30,000 officers all across New York City, these officers could not even secure a train and prevent an individual from participating in a mass shooting that was designed to terrorize passengers, and this was a complete failure of the entire whole law enforcement and the mayor who was managing it, because if your officers allowed this kind of incident to happen, it shows it's not about the billions of dollars in resources as related to a fiscal budget. No, this is a complete failure of leadership as related to managing resources and managing manpower. Because if you have all of this manpower and they cannot go out here and identify a terrorist situation, then clearly something is wrong with the leadership here. Now, your New York Mayor Eric Adams, he talked about getting crime under control, but it's looking more and more like he's lost control of the situation because his focus has been completely distracted, because he's so caught up in things like try to mandate masks for toddlers, and he's out here trying to force New Yorkers who want to work to continue taking a jab, and he does not understand how these distractions are preventing him from being able to manage New York City. And this is why it is important for him to end these mandates so that he can focus on crime. Unfortunately, your New York Mayor Eric Adams can't see the big picture as related to leadership because he's too busy trying to follow behind other politicians in an effort to gain their approval and their attention as he tries to apply for a job in other parts of the Biden administration. And again, that's a black eye on his leadership, because this is why individuals like this can slip through the cracks and go out here and participate in this type of wanton violence. Now, this is also embarrassing to the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, because again, this is in her state where you're seeing these whole failures of leadership, and that's why all of this situation is continuing to deteriorate here in New York City, because it's a complete failure of leadership all around. We have an MTA which spends billions of dollars on a camera system that can't get a picture of the individual. We have a mayor who cannot supervise and manage his officers as related to this whole subway situation, which gets worse with every day. And we have no vision and no direction for New York City due to, just as I see it, growing to become more and more incompetent leadership that is more focused on things like social media and trying to go out here and present an image of things looking good as related to getting attention, but not looking on focusing on the important details of making sure that New Yorkers can go out here and get from point A to point B safely on a train. Now, in the aftermath of this mass shooting, this individual has been named a person of interest, but I want to wait until we get more information about that individual before I make another video on them. Now, the police have said they've allegedly found a bag filled with fireworks. So this individual was not only planning to do a mass shooting, they were planning on doing further harm to people, and they were planning an incident, as I believe it, to possibly terrorize people. And this individual was not found because of the elaborate security systems. Sadly, it was found because some police officers did some police work, found this guy's van that he rented from U-Haul in Philadelphia, and they found his credit card in the van. And this is, they say there's a suspect that they're looking for, but when I look at this whole suspect's behavior, it definitely fits the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And the big problem here is not a gun control issue, no, because New York State has some of the strictest gun laws, and that did not stop this individual from participating in this mass shooting here in New York City and Brooklyn. No, the reason why we're seeing this increase in this violent behavior has nothing to do with guns, but it has to do with the way we raised boys over the last 60 years inside of these single mother households, divorced households, and with beta male fathers. And as these boys were raised in a dysfunctional fashion inside of these homes, these boys grew up to become men in crisis. And these 2 to 3 generations of ticking time bombs are all across the country. And sadly, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen these men in crisis turn into male landmines, and these landmines are exploding at an increasing frequency because that period of isolation over the last 2 years in those lockdowns led to these men winding up in virtual echo chambers, and inside of those echo chambers, these idle minds became the devil's workshop. And as these men began to sit there and imagine what they could do as related to criminal behavior, they started coming up with these plans, and now they're acting on these plans. But your politicians who have already got caught with their pants down as related to one of the worst breaches of security since 9/11 and the LIRR massacre, they really do not want to sit here and discuss America's ongoing man crisis. And the reason why many of these leftist politicians don't want to discuss the man crisis is because it was their policies that directly created the man crisis 60 years ago, and it was their policies as related to these lockdowns that created the exacerbation of the man crisis 2 years ago. And it was these politicians who don't want to talk about all of the women and their part in creating this man crisis, because they don't want to alienate one of the largest voting blocs out here, and they don't want to go out here and hold females accountable, especially your feminists, for going out here and saying that a boy didn't need a father to become a man, because that's one of the core reasons why we have these men in crisis, and these men who have no direction, no purpose, and no hope are out here destroying the world. And they're destroying the world because they see that there is nobody who will give them any sort of support. And many of these men feel like they have nothing to lose. And since they feel like they have nothing to lose, many of these males are out here looking to destroy the world around them. And sadly, many of your politicians, their whole thing is to sit there and deflect and talk about gun control and talk about we need to put more officers on the street as related to dealing with beta male violence. But the core foundation of all of this violence is all of these beta males out here. And until we acknowledge the man crisis in this country, we are not going to be able to diffuse these beta males, nor are we going to be able to deal with the millions of landmines that are exploding all across this country. The only way to really deal with it in the short term is to get rid of these policies like your bail reform that have messed up New York City, and you also need a multiple point plan to deal with all of the numerous issues of the man crisis by investing in men and giving these men a sense of purpose and direction. The reason why we see all of this wanton violence like these mass shootings going on is because many of these men feel frustrated, many of these men feel angry, many of these men feel like they have no purpose in this world, many of these men feel like they have nothing to lose, and many of these men are becoming more and more of a clear and present danger, and more of these men are wreaking more havoc all across places like New York City. And sadly, because we have the wrong politicians in place, like an Eric Adams or a Kathy Hochul, there's no acknowledgement of the man crisis. And because they are more interested in getting brownie points on social media, there's no real plan to deal with this man crisis, and no real plan on how to go out here and deal with individuals like this. Because if they could not focus on dealing with a situation like this, where a mass shooter basically goes on a train and basically shoots 10 people and injures 13, I shudder at what could have happened if one of these individuals had a more lethal weapon. It would have been an absolutely more devastating event. And again, it just shows how your politicians are just ill-equipped to deal with this man crisis, and how they're just completely ill-equipped to deal with this kind of violence. And again, it just shows how people just aren't remaining vigilant about these kind of situations, because 21 years after 9/11, almost 30 years after Colin Ferguson took the train on the LIRR and participated in a mass shooting, there should have been a remaining vigilance as related to crime here in New York City. And even with all of this technology, it just shows me the real problem is that the men in our community have no sense of direction, because a vigilant group of men would have identified this man in crisis, and they would have tried to prevent this, got to this man before he had reached this dangerous stage. Now, if you want to learn more about individuals like the kind of beta males who participate in this kind of violence and what motivates them to do harm like this, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also pick up The Man Crisis on Smashwords, the iBook store, and Google Play. And if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle, Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Learn how to avoid predatory females like Instagram models and e-girls in their virtual con games with Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Get your copy of Stop Simping in Cyberspace in paperback and Kindle today.